Okay, let's take a look. Let's kind of continue forward here, looking at the mature Gothic, again moving forward in France. In 1243, King Louis ordered Sainte-Chapelle as a palace chapel to hold very important relics. These are relics that were all associated with the crucifixion of Christ. So the crown of thorns, a bit of the lance of the Roman soldier, a bit of the sponge, and a fragment of what was believed to be the true cross. The king had purchased these treasures in 1239 from his cousin, Baldwin of Flanders, who was ruling as Emperor of Byzantium at that time. And in a way, this structure, this chapel, is a kind of giant reliquary itself. It is architecture as reliquary. What we're looking at in the picture here on the left is the upper chapel that is connected to the king's private apartment and reserved for royal use, and the display of the relics. The lower chapel, which we're not looking at, is dedicated to the Virgin, which was used by as a parish church by the members of the royal household. And we can see in the upper chapel here, it is simply one enormous clerestory. We have stained glass from the bottom to the top. It creates this very delicate feeling. This is an example of moving into what is called rayonnant, Rayonnant style, or this kind of the full flowering, the full maturation of Gothic. The masonry walls seem to disappear. Rayonnant means radiant because, of course, we have this beautiful glowing stained glass that completely infuses the space. Tracery is expanded. The ceiling is painted with the stars of heaven. And we have this fantastic artifact here on the right. This is from an individual's book of hours. So this is an individual prayer book meant for not a monk or a nun, but a member of the laity. This is the Duke of Berry's very beautiful hours. And in the calendar pages that start a book of hours, we see a little scene here in June of people harvesting hay. We see some trees beginning to flower here, or leaf out in the back. And then we have Paris. And lo and behold, right here on the right-hand side of this book of hours, we see an image of Sainte-Chapelle as it originally looked, surrounded by the other palace buildings. All right, we're looking at a page, the kind of a dedication page for a huge Bible, a picture Bible. And these Gothic Bibles are often called moralized Bibles because each biblical event was paired with one explaining its moral significance, hence the term moralizing. And in this dedication page, we see the Queen Mother, Blanche of Castile, and her son, King Louis IX, on the top register, presiding over a kind of mini scriptorium on the bottom where a scholar and illuminator work on a manuscript. Now, Louis IX, he is one of the Capetian rulers in this long line of prosperous French kings. He reigned from 1226 to 1270, and this perfectly coincided with the mature phase of the Gothic style and an era of peace and prosperity in France. So he was a huge patron of the arts. And if we look at this lower register here, again, all of these figures framed in this trefoil, this kind of three-lobed arch that we see in Gothic tracery around stained glass, for example. And so we have this, we have here the author kind of dictating to a scribe, both sitting at these medieval bench desks. And look at this detail of the scribe. I love this because here again, we get a little bit of insight into how medieval artists work. Because here we see him holding a palette knife, kind of stabilizing stabilizing the vellum, and then we see him with here a quilled pen, and he's outlining a page that has not yet been illuminated. And what we see is the page is organized into these little roundels. We can imagine each roundel would hold a biblical scene, and then its moral significance would be explained kind of in the right-hand column. Another mature Gothic illumination from France is this page from the Psalter of Louis, who was canonized, Saint Louis. And again, we see Gothic architecture being used as the background and as the framing material in this folio. And so if we look here, we see this line of lancet windows divided up with tracery. We even see the ends here of what should be flying buttresses. And then we also have mini rose windows and these trefoil lobes here outlining a scene from the Old Testament. This is Abraham's visit where he's visited by three angels. And we see a continuous narrative here where Abraham is encountering the three angels, bringing them back to his home, his wife Sarah here on the side. This is an early prefiguration of the Holy Trinity. So it's an Old Testament story, so before the life of Christ, and it is in that medieval typology, this prefigures in the coming of Christ, who then completes the Trinity. All right. Let's talk about Hildegard von Bingen. This is my cat's namesake, everybody. And Hildegard was so many things. She was a nun, a Benedictine nun, a political advisor, a mystic, an author, a composer, a scientist, a leader, really. She corresponded with King Henry II of England, Bernard of Clairvaux, the great Cistercian, and she was also a female mystic, and I think that we need to understand a little bit of mysticism here before we look more at women in Gothic art. Mysticism is a kind of approach to religion that is not unique to Christianity. We see mysticism in Islam, Judaism, Buddhism, and it's based on visions and having an out-of-body experience, for example, leaving the mystic disconnected or unresponsive to the world during one of these mystical visions. And Hildegard had many visions throughout her life. Female mystics were often considered prophets by their monastic communities. Because women were left out of the church authority entirely, the church didn't believe that they had any sort of authority or intellect to impart biblical wisdom. However, women were thought to be more susceptible to experiencing a rapture or a mystical experience. Here all talking about the Middle Ages. And many feminist academics today view mysticism as one important break with the medieval polarities that place women in a subordinate position. And it's actually an example of how women wielded an immense amount of power in the Middle Ages that was then in severe retreat during the Renaissance. In patriarchal cultures that deny subjecthood to women, the mystical experience is the one that dissolves that kind of subject-object opposition, and it is one area of high spiritual endeavor in which women have really excelled. Hildegard was born to well-to-do parents in the Rhineland. Her father was a knight, and as a child she had these visions that she later describes. She saw shimmering lights, circling stars, and so the family decides to enroll her as a novice in a convent at the age of 7. So she gets a fantastic education, and convents really were the only place women had an opportunity to learn and be educated. She was trained in scripture, Latin, and music, and took the vows of a Benedictine nun in 1117. So what does that make her? 19 years old. And she was elected abbess in 1136. She told Bernard of Clairvaux about her visions, that she wanted to raise the church above worldly concerns with renewed faith, deep mystical contemplation, And she told the Pope about this too. So her one of her most important works is the Liber Scivias. Scivias are it's translated as kind of knowing the ways of the world of the Lord, and it includes kind of different hymns, a miracle play. She talks about her visions and her understanding of faith and salvation. And I should say too that she also wrote. Not only did she compose music, the Liber Scivias, but she also wrote books on plants and trees, animals, birds, minerals. She was a Renaissance woman long before the Renaissance. And I think I'm going to end this video here and then come back to finish up this section on women in Gothic art.